Let's start with a truth many avoid. Anger doesn't come from others. It doesn't arise because of what someone said or how they treated you. Anger is internal response to external information. And here's the power in that. If it arises from within, then it can be mastered from within. You were not born angry. You were not designed to be easily rattled or pushed around by words, glances, or careless actions. Your nervous system, complex, miraculous, was built for far more than reaction. It was built for adaptation, clarity, and control, but it requires your participation. If someone cuts you off in traffic or says something rude or disrespects you, pause, don't react, observe. What you're feeling in that moment is not them. It's you interpreting them through a nervous system trained by old patterns, past experiences, and default survival scripts. But you can rewrite those scripts. The next time you feel that surge, that familiar heat in your chest, that spike in your breath, use it. Use it as a signal that you're alive, aware, and capable. Shift your breathing. Inhale deeply, hold, and extend your exhale. Do it again. You're not calming down. Calming down. You're taking control. You're switching gears from a primitive state into a conscious one. You must understand anger is not power. Presence is. Clarity is. People who throw their anger around are not strong. They're untrained. They're hijacked by systems they never learned to command. And you are not them. Let them speak. Let them mock. Let them project their fear and hurt into the world like arrows. But you hold the shield of your mission. What you're building with your life, with your time on earth, is too important to be shaken by noise. There is divinity in restraint. There is strength in staying composed when the world expects you to react. You don't need to prove anything. When your nervous system is trained and your mind is disciplined, silence becomes the loudest statement you can make. Stillness is not weakness. It is signal clarity. You don't avoid anger by suppressing it. You transcend it by understanding it. You look at the wiring, you rewire, and then you choose. Every moment, every day, you choose not to be pulled by emotion, but to be driven by purpose. Anger begins as a biological event long before it becomes a conscious emotion. It is not just a feeling. It's a full-body physiological response initiated by the brain in reaction to a perceived threat, challenge, or violation. And at the core of this process is the amygdala, a small but powerful structure deep in the brain's limbic system. The amygdala scans the environment continuously, looking for signs of danger. When it detects something it interprets as threatening, it sends a rapid signal to other brain regions, especially the hypothalamus, which then activates the sympathetic nervous system, the part responsible for our fight or flight response. This activation sets off a cascade of changes. The heart rate increases, breathing becomes rapid and shallow, muscles tense, pupils dilate, and cortisol and adrenaline flood the bloodstream. These stress hormones prepare the body to act, either to fight or to flee.
Yep.
This system evolved to keep humans alive in dangerous environments. When a saber-toothed cat approached, this response would prime our ancestors to either escape or engage with maximum physical readiness. In modern life, however, the threats we perceive are often psychological or social, someone's words, tone of voice, or perceived disrespect. The same biological machinery kicks in, even though we're not physically in danger. A driver cutting you off in traffic or a coworker undermining you in a meeting can trigger the exact same hormonal surge and nervous system activation as an actual physical threat. That's the crux of the issue. The brain does not always distinguish between a real physical threat and a perceived social threat. It treats both with the same defensive posture, but there's another layer. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for executive functions like judgment, impulse control, and decision-making, has the capacity to regulate this response. It can assess the context, inhibit the reactive signal, and choose a more skillful path. However, this requires training. In many people, the connection between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala is weak, especially under stress. Chronic stress, lack of sleep, poor nutrition, or even past trauma can reduce this regulatory capacity, making anger more impulsive and less manageable. Look, understanding this biology is empowering. It reveals that anger is not who you are. It's what your body is doing in response to a pattern it learned often years ago. And because it's a biological process, it can be influenced biologically. Breathing techniques, for instance, can shift the body out of sympathetic arousal into parasympathetic calm. Long exhalations signal to the brain that the threat has passed, even if your mind hasn't caught up yet. This sends a message up the chain. We are safe. We are okay. We do not need to react. Moreover, repeated exposure to anger-inducing situations without mindful regulation creates strong neural pathways. Anger becomes a default, but neuroplasticity works both ways. With consistent practices that increase awareness and regulation, like meditation, breath work, and somatic awareness, you can create new pathways where calm becomes the default. You're literally rewiring your brain to choose peace over reactivity. When you understand anger biologically, you stop taking it personally. You begin to see it as energy misdirected, not identity. You begin to respect the brilliance of your body's alert systems while also learning how to guide them. You no longer see anger as something to suppress or judge, but as something to observe, redirect, and eventually transcend. Through this lens, every trigger becomes an opportunity to deepen your mastery, not of others, but of yourself. The autonomic nervous system governs many of the body's automatic processes: heart rate, digestion, respiratory rate, and emotional responses. It operates largely beneath our conscious awareness and consists of two primary branches: the sympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for the fight or flight response, and the parasympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for rest, recovery, and restoration. Mastering this system is essential if you want to remain unshaken in the face of provocation, stress, or conflict. The sympathetic nervous system is designed to activate the body when there is a perceived threat. This activation is rapid and intense. Your heart rate spikes, blood is diverted from internal organs to muscles, and the body prepares for action. This is useful if you are in physical danger. But in everyday life, the stressors we encounter, an offensive comment, a disapproving look, a challenge to our competence, are not physical threats, yet they are interpreted by the body in the same way. The body prepares to fight, even if there's no battle to win. When someone upsets you or acts in a way that normally triggers anger, it's your sympathetic nervous system being hijacked. You are no longer responding with clarity. You are reacting with primitive, untrained energy. In this state, the prefrontal cortex, responsible for decision-making and self-control, goes offline or loses dominance. The amygdala takes over. You say things you regret. You react before you think. You move from intention to impulsiveness. That is not mastery. That is biological surrender. But here is what is extraordinary. The autonomic nervous system is trainable. You can learn to recognize when you are slipping into sympathetic dominance and actively switch to parasympathetic control. This process does not rely on external circumstances changing. It requires an internal protocol of regulation, awareness, and repetition. Breath work is one of the most powerful tools in this regard. Specifically, practices like physiological sighs, 2 quick inhales followed by a slow extended exhale, can shift the nervous system toward calm in under a minute. Longer exhalations signal to the brain that danger has passed, encouraging the parasympathetic system to take over. Equally important is interoception, the skill of sensing what is happening inside your body. Most people are unaware of the subtle signs that they're entering a stress state. Their shoulders tense, their breath becomes shallow, their jaw tightens. By becoming attuned to these early signals, you can interrupt the process before it escalates. That awareness alone gives you a window, a moment in which you can choose to respond rather than react. Cold exposure, deliberate heat exposure, fasting, and focused physical training can all build resilience in the autonomic system. When you expose your body to controlled stress in these contexts, you teach it how to stay calm under pressure. You increase your window of tolerance. You develop nervous system flexibility, which is the key to staying composed when life becomes unpredictable. This is not about suppressing emotions or pretending nothing bothers you. It's about building such a strong internal foundation that nothing controls you. People around you may still act foolishly, disrespectfully, or aggressively, but when your autonomic nervous system is under conscious influence, those behaviors are merely passing noise. They do not penetrate. They do not steer your mind or body. You remain grounded, centered, and free. Mastery of the autonomic nervous system is not an abstract ideal. It is a discipline. It is trained through repetition, tested in moments of tension, and forged in the daily decisions to control your breath, your posture, your gaze, and your thoughts. Over time, this mastery becomes automatic. aim. You walk into the world with an unshakable core, not because the world is calm, but because you are. When you experience anger, irritation, or frustration in response to someone else's behavior, what you're really experiencing is a trigger, a stimulus that touches something within you and initiates a response. Most people live as if these triggers are threats, reacting to them with defensiveness, aggression, or withdrawal. But if you shift your relationship to triggers, everything changes. Instead of seeing them as attacks or personal violations, you begin to see them as information, data points from the environment and your internal world. This shift is not philosophical. It is neurological, psychological, and profoundly practical. When someone says something disrespectful or challenges your opinion, the nervous system reacts as though it's under siege. The body tightens, adrenaline spikes, and thought patterns rapidly spiral into defense and retaliation. But that sequence only happens if the trigger is interpreted as a threat. This is where the conscious mind has power. In the few milliseconds before a full-blown emotional response occurs, there is a gap. In that gap lies your ability to assign meaning. And meaning determines direction, how you feel, how you act, and how you remember the event. It's nothing more than a signal. It is a message that something in your internal landscape has been activated. Maybe it touched a memory, an insecurity, or an unmet need. But rather than viewing it as something that must be destroyed or silenced, it can be examined. Why did that statement affect you? Why did that tone cause a surge in your chest? The brain thrives on prediction and control. When something or someone disrupts that rhythm, the alarm bells go off. But those alarms are just data valuable, revealing data. By viewing triggers as data, you step into the role of observer rather than reactor. The moment you observe, you create distance. That distance gives space for reflection, regulation, and choice. You are no longer a puppet of your environment. You're an analyst interpreting signals. That person cutting you off in traffic, they're not attacking your dignity. They're a variable in your environment. Their behavior is a piece of data about their own state, not yours. The colleague who interrupts you, or the friend who dismisses your opinion. Their actions say more about their inner world than they do about your worth or intelligence. This approach also cultivates compassion, not the kind that excuses bad behavior, but the kind that understands the root of it. Most people are reacting from their own unprocessed pain. When they lash out, it's not personal, it's habitual. They are caught in their own loop, just as you once were. Recognizing this allows you to hold your center while others lose theirs. You stop needing to prove yourself, defend your ground, or win the exchange. You gain authority over your internal environment, and that is where true strength lies. Of course, this reframe doesn't happen automatically. It requires repeated mental conditioning. It's a muscle that builds through deliberate practice. Each time you're triggered, you take a breath, acknowledge the signal, and decode it. What is this moment trying to teach me? Where did that emotion come from? What pattern is being revealed? When you answer from this frame, triggers stop being problems. They become paths to mastery. They show you where you are still reactive, where your boundaries need reinforcing, or where old wounds are asking for attention. Eventually, the world becomes less threatening. You stop expecting perfection from others or smoothness from life. You understand that discomfort is feedback. Emotional spikes are alerts, not emergencies. And most importantly, you become someone who doesn't fear being triggered because you know how to meet it with clarity, calm, and insight. You become unshakable, not because life has stopped testing you, but because you've stopped treating the test like an attack. It's just data. And you're here to learn. The modern mind is constantly stimulated by notifications, conversations, schedules, noise, and internal dialogues that rarely stop. It's pulled in every direction, reacting to stimuli without rest or clarity. This hyperactive state becomes the baseline for most people. And when something or someone presses against them, there's no buffer, no space. That's when irritation, anger, or overwhelm rush in, not because the trigger was powerful, but because the mind was already too scattered to respond with stability. Daily stillness is not optional in the pursuit of inner mastery. It is essential. It is the training ground where you reclaim authority over your thoughts, emotions, and physiological state. Stillness does not mean absence of thought. It means learning to observe thought without being consumed by it. When you sit in stillness each day, whether through meditation, breath work, or focused silence, you create space between stimulus and response. You begin to witness the mind's tendencies, the patterns it loops in, the stories it tells, the judgments it forms. And in that witnessing, something extraordinary happens. You are no longer fully identified with those patterns. You can see them without becoming them. This shift is supported by neurobiology. Regular stillness activates and strengthens the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for executive control, decision-making, and emotional regulation. It also reduces activity in the default mode network, which is associated with mind-wandering, self-referential thinking, and rumination. These are the exact patterns that feed anger, anxiety, and reactivity. When you reduce their dominance through stillness, your brain begins to operate differently. You don't just feel calmer, you become more capable of clarity, especially under pressure, fuzzy under pressure. Consistent stillness also trains the nervous system to become more flexible. It expands your window of tolerance. So when life presents challenges or when someone pushes your buttons, you're not thrown into fight or flight so easily. Instead of being hijacked by the sympathetic nervous system, you remain anchored in parasympathetic control. Your breath stays steady. Your awareness remains open. You can respond with presence rather than react out of habit. This capacity is not reserved for monks or mystics. It's available to anyone willing to sit with themselves daily. Stillness also reorients your perception of time. In the rush of everyday life, everything feels urgent. But when you return to stillness again and again, you discover that most of the urgency was self-created. The space you create in silence teaches you patience, not as a passive act, but as a powerful discipline. Patience with yourself, with others, and with the process of growth. It teaches you to trust that not every impulse must be acted on, not every offense must be answered, and not every discomfort needs to be fixed immediately. Importantly, stillness reveals your internal landscape. It shows you where fear lives, where unresolved anger hides, where stories of inadequacy have taken root. This is not to judge or resist those parts, but to meet them consciously. Daily stillness becomes a mirror, and what you see in that mirror is not always pretty. It's real. And when you learn to be with that reality without flinching, you become immensely powerful. You are no longer manipulated by unseen forces within you. You bring light to them. You choose how to engage. This is not a once-in-a-while practice. It's a daily recalibration. Like brushing your teeth or training your body, it compounds over time. The benefits are subtle at first. A little more patience here, a little more awareness there. But over weeks and months, it transforms you. You become someone who carries stillness into chaos, who listens deeply when others shout, who breathes slowly when others rush. You no longer depend on the world to be quiet because you've trained your mind to be. And in that quiet, you find not just peace, but power. When you build a high-integrity identity, you create a foundation that is not easily shaken by the behavior, opinions, or judgments of others. It's not about arrogance or pretending you are invulnerable. It's about knowing deeply and clearly who you are, what you value, and what you will and will not allow into your inner world. Without that clarity, you drift. You respond to external pressures with confusion or emotional volatility because there's no internal compass to guide your response. But when your identity is grounded in integrity, reactions are replaced by intentional action. You don't just survive interactions. You shape them. Integrity starts with alignment. When your words, actions, and internal beliefs are consistent, the nervous system becomes more regulated. There's less conflict within you, and that calm creates space for presence. Presence, in turn, allows you to face tension or disrespect without being emotionally hijacked. You don't need to defend yourself because your sense of self is not under threat. You've already chosen who you are, and you live in alignment with that choice, regardless of what others say or do. Building a high-integrity identity requires self-honesty. It means examining where you compromise, where you betray your own values to gain approval, avoid discomfort, or fit in. These moments seem small, but they fracture your identity. Over time, they create a version of yourself that is reactive, inconsistent, and vulnerable to manipulation. On the other hand, when you commit to being honest, even when it's uncomfortable, you begin to trust yourself. That trust becomes inner strength. You become someone whose presence carries weight, not because you dominate others, but because you don't need to perform. In the presence of a strong identity, provocations lose their power. Someone else's rudeness doesn't determine your behavior. You don't take offense at every criticism because you know what's true about you and what isn't. You become less interested in controlling how others see you and more focused on living a life that reflects your principles. That kind of congruence creates peace. It also demands discipline. Discipline is the architect of integrity. You don't become someone who speaks and lives with conviction by accident. You earn that through the daily choice to say no to what weakens you and yes to what strengthens you. It shows up in how you speak to yourself when no one is around, how you show up in difficult conversations, and how you honor your commitments, even when they are inconvenient. Identity also requires boundaries. A high-integrity person does not absorb everyone's emotions or opinions. You learn to filter the world through your values. Not every invitation deserves a response. Not every insult deserves your energy. When your identity is weak, you try to please or prove. But when it is strong, you simply live. You walk into every room knowing you are not here to perform. You're here to contribute. That alone is disarming to people who seek power through provocation. The most powerful aspect of a high-integrity identity is that it is immune to external chaos. You don't need perfect conditions to be composed. You don't need everyone to agree with you to be confident. You are rooted in something deeper, character. When you live from that root, you do not react from insecurity, but respond from alignment. You are not pulled by emotion, but led by clarity. That kind of identity must be revisited often. Often. You must ask yourself regularly, am I living according to my values or someone else's expectations? Am I acting from fear or from principle? The more honestly you answer, the more stable you become. And the more stable you become, the less others can move you. You stop being a mirror of your environment and become a signal instead. A signal of what it means to live awake, intentional, and unwavering, no matter the noise around you. Every moment of the day, your body and brain exist in a particular physiological and emotional state. That state determines your perception, your behavior, and how you interpret the world around you. When someone disrespects you, when a situation feels unfair, or when stress begins to build, your state begins to shift, often unconsciously, toward defensiveness, frustration, or even rage. But you are not powerless in that shift. The most grounded and composed individuals understand that while they cannot always control what happens around them, they can control the internal state from which they respond. And they do this through intentional use of state-shifting tools. State shifting is the practice of moving yourself from one internal condition to another, from agitation to calm, from fear to courage, from distraction to focus. It's the skill of changing your nervous system's configuration, not by waiting for the environment to change, but by using techniques that directly influence physiology. When mastered, this becomes one of the most powerful tools for never getting angry or thrown off by anyone. One of the fastest and most accessible tools is breath. Your breath is a direct handle on your autonomic nervous system. Shallow, rapid breathing feeds anxiety and fuels the sympathetic fight or flight response. But when you slow your breath, especially your exhale, you tell the brain that you are safe. That safety signal cascades down through your entire system. A simple breath protocol, such as a double inhale, followed by a long extended exhale, can calm your system within 60 seconds. You're not suppressing emotion. You're changing the state in which the emotion exists. You are creating space where reaction would otherwise live. Another powerful tool is posture. The way you hold your body affects your internal chemistry. Slumped shoulders, a collapsed chest, or shallow posture tells the brain you are under threat or in retreat. But standing tall, opening your chest, lifting your gaze, these postures send signals of strength and confidence to the brain. The nervous system takes cues from the body. If you act powerless, your physiology will follow. But if you claim a strong, intentional posture, even when you don't feel strong, your body begins to shift out of defense mode. You feel more stable, less reactive. Cold exposure, intense physical movement, or deliberate stillness can also act as state shifters. A few minutes of cold water exposure or a set of sprints can reset stress hormones and sharpen focus. It clears mental fog and breaks emotional loops. On the other end of the spectrum, stillness, deep, intentional stillness can also reset the system. When you sit with yourself and breathe in silence, you downregulate the chaos that accumulates from a day of stimuli and stress. You exit the loop of reaction and re-enter your natural rhythm. Mental reframing is another tool. It requires the discipline to pause and reinterpret what's happening around you. When someone behaves poorly, instead of interpreting it as a personal offense, you can shift your state by reminding yourself, this is data, not danger. This is a test of my discipline, not a threat to my worth. This reframe activates the prefrontal cortex and deactivates the emotional spiral. It's not denial. It's conscious authorship of your internal world. Each of these tools is simple. None of them require special equipment or years of training, but their effectiveness lies in repetition and readiness. You don't want to start learning them when you're already overwhelmed. You want them in your nervous system like reflexes, accessible, practiced, and automatic. Over time, using these tools rewires your stress responses. You begin to trust yourself under pressure. You no longer fear anger rising because you know how to meet it with precision. You don't suppress emotion. You move through it skillfully with tools you've trained into your biology. This is what separates reactivity from resilience. The reactive person is a victim of their state. The resilient person is an artist of it. And in the moments that matter most, the one who can shift their state is the one who leads, not just others, but themselves. Most people live in reaction. They wake up and immediately respond to the demands of others. The messages, the noise, the pressure. Their mood is dictated by the headlines, by the comments of strangers, by fleeting discomforts. In this reactive loop, there's no room for grounded decision making. There's only survival, mental, emotional, and spiritual. But there is another path. A path where you live in purpose. A path where your actions are shaped not by what the world throws at you, but by what you've chosen to stand for. Living in purpose is not poetic, practical. It's the antidote to being emotionally hijacked by people or circumstances. Purpose is not just a career or a passion. It is a lens, a framework to interpret every situation. When you're anchored in purpose, you don't waste energy on distractions. You don't allow someone's opinion or disrespect to define your state. You respond, not react, because you know where you're going. You're not pulled off course by petty conflict. You're too focused, not in a narrow way, but in a deep, disciplined way. You know who you are. And because of that, you don't need to prove it every time someone tries to test it. Living in purpose means deciding in advance what kind of person you are, what you value, what behavior is acceptable, and what is not internally and externally. It gives you standards to live by that don't fluctuate with your emotions or the behavior of others. Someone cuts you off, disrespects you, lies to you. You don't descend into their frequency. You remember, I don't move like that. I've chosen something higher. This isn't weakness. It's strength under control, and it's rare. When you don't have purpose, everything feels personal. Every slight is a threat. Every delay is an insult. But when you live in purpose, you develop perspective. You begin to see the game from a higher altitude. That person yelling isn't attacking you. They're in pain. That betrayal wasn't about your worth. It was about their fear. Your purpose acts like armor, not because you're closed off, but because you're rooted in something that can't be shaken by emotional weather. The nervous system responds differently when it feels aligned with purpose. You have more resilience, more clarity, more inner peace. Why? Because you've reduced internal friction. You're not fighting yourself while trying to manage the world. You know what matters. You've decided what you stand for. Wow, does it? And that clarity makes you dangerous in the best way. You don't flinch at criticism. You don't crumble under stress. You move forward with a quiet power that doesn't need validation. This doesn't mean you don't feel anger or frustration. It means you're not owned by it. You notice that you breathe through it and you ask, what does my purpose require of me right now? That question pulls you out of the emotional swirl and back into alignment. It turns moments of reactivity into opportunities for growth.